I have always found it quaint and rather touching that there is a movement, libertarians, in the US that thinks Americans are not yet selfish enough.
Wow. Now, this video is just complete hot garbage. I mean, usually I start off with a lengthy introduction, but this intro speaks for itself as to what we're dealing with here. I mean, you don't even need to get into the video to see how little this fellow understands the subject he's attempting to refute or talk about. His thumbnail has a picture of Ayn Rand and Austin Peterson. One of them isn't even a libertarian according to their own views, and Peterson is pretty much universally reviled among libertarians because of his blatant support for the use of aggression pretty much whenever it's convenient for him, which runs directly contrary to libertarian values. So, the creator of this video, who ironically calls his channel Rationality Rules, has immediately started by poisoning the well with the character assassination of people representing the ideas whom he's trying to refute. All libertarians are just selfish and want people to be selfish, which is really not a good sign. It shows a lack of confidence in his own position, which is a surefire way to tell that we're in for a copious amount of bullshit. And it should go without saying, but no, libertarianism is not about being selfish or wanting people to be selfish. Libertarians simply argue that because individuals have agency, they must necessarily have dominion over their own actions, or what they could demonstrate as being a product of their own actions. As a result, initiations of force are inherently illegitimate and only consensual associations can be justified. Consequently, statism does not possess the necessary explanatory power to justify itself, since there is no proof anyone in fact ever gave consent to politicians to form a government and rule over their lives, and the mere concept of a political ruler is a logical absurdity because of self-ownership. Or to put it simply, not that I should have things my way, but that everyone should have things their own way and no one has the right to tell them otherwise. And this is in direct contrast with statism, where the statist argues that a monopoly on arbitration, in other words, the government, is legitimate because they want to have an external organization rob from people and otherwise forcibly coerce everyone in order to associate with it in whatever it does, regardless of what they want and whether or not they want to be a part of it. This makes it even more perplexing as to why statists argue that libertarians are the selfish ones when they're the only group that simply want everyone to live their own way, while statists want everyone to be forced into their brand of statism against their will. Now, you can speculate as to why this is, though I've noticed one constant with this argumentation, that it's never the classical liberals or the minarchists who say this. It's always the welfare statists or the central planners, like Steve Shives or Cenk Uygur, the people who are the most openly authoritarian and unapologetic about their beliefs regarding the state. So it would appear that this is just an act of Freudian projection.
Anyhow, to explain why I'm not a libertarian, it stands to reason that I begin by describing what exactly libertarianism is, right? And so here's an attempt to stillman it. Likewise to all political philosophies, libertarianism represents a wide array of movements and beliefs, but all are predicated on the core principle of liberty. Now, what exactly liberty means depends on the libertarian.
No, libertarianism is and always has been about self-ownership and the implications of it, primarily the non-aggression principle. So this is a complete misrepresentation of the libertarians' ideals, in order to strawman them and make them seem more arbitrary than they actually are, considering that in the media the principles of libertarianism are almost never properly explained. I would give this a pass. However, right before this, the host attempts to claim he's steel-manning, as in to claim he's properly explaining libertarianism to make it harder to disagree with. So this, on top of claiming libertarianism is selfish from the perspective of someone whose worldview is genuinely selfish, I cannot help but suspect that this was deliberate.
As traditional libertarians sought to abolish capitalism and private property, while contemporary libertarians advocate laissez-faire capitalism and strong private property rights.
That is not true, but I've done multiple videos refuting this myth in detail already, and I'm not doing it again. So, if you want to see a more substantive rebuttal, go to this video here, here, or here. Even assuming it was, however, you would still be wrong, as even the earliest so-called libertarian socialists, like Bakunin or Kropotkin, all had rationalist frameworks for their ethical perspectives of how human rights were conceived of. This is to say that they believed in a law which they thought was derived from observation and a priori reasoning. Similar to actual voluntarists, however, they came to different conclusions, mainly as a result of cognitive dissonance or not taking certain aspects of agency into account.
One of the most eloquent and convincing summations of the libertarian philosophy that I've ever heard of comes from Walter Edward Williams, who in his book titled All It Takes Is Guts wrote the following: "But let me offer you my definition of social justice. I keep what I earn and you keep what you earn. Do you disagree? Well then, tell me how much of what I earn belongs to you and why." And so, what's my answer? Why do I think that strangers are entitled to some of Walter's fruit? Well, to put it bluntly, Walter fell out of the right vagina at the right time. He inherited a biological and/or socio-economic advantage that he did not earn, and thus he does not deserve all of the fruit of his labor.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
That's not how rights work. Because logic is objective, it's necessarily consistent and follows the law of non-contradiction. If human beings have agency as a result of being human beings, and they have rights because they have agency, you cannot justify an argument for violating the rights of another human being by sticking them in some arbitrarily defined category you made up on the spot. This is why class politics are absolute fucking cancer, and their only purpose is to dehumanize people in an attempt to justify government tyranny. And trying to invoke class identity politics here doesn't even make sense because Walter Edward Williams was born to a black family in poverty during the Great Depression. I mean, the assumptions any sort of class theory make are just objectively wrong, too. Like how it assumes that people are collectives with no individuality who conspire together based on wealth. How if someone is wealthy, it necessarily means that anyone who isn't wealthy is in their position because of the people who are. And it assumes most rich people obtain their money because it was inherited, when in fact 67% of all people who have more than $1 million made it through their own business practices, and that inheritance of over $1 million is lost by the second generation in 70% of all cases. In short, there is no legal manner in which a group can have demonstrable legitimacy. Groups are merely collections of individuals, and therefore only the individuals within them can demonstrate their rights. Since group rights are not inherent features, nor can be naturally demonstrated, this means that they will have to be established forcefully by a state, and will require the subjugation of the individual's rights to secure. Let's present things as they are. Group rights are merely a euphemism for slavery.
In 1971, the American political philosopher John Rawls wrote A Theory of Justice, and within it, he, as many of you likely know, observed that when people contemplate and determine the structure and rules of society, they do so selfishly, based on their personal circumstances, characteristics, and preferences, such as their mental and physical abilities, social status, ethnicity, gender, and, most crucially, their conception of what's good. Thus, it's no surprise that some people who can afford the bare basics, such as shelter and food, want a society in which they're not obliged, through tax, to pay towards other people's bare basics. Likewise, it's no surprise that some people who can afford to pay for their family's medical bills want a society in which they're not obliged, through tax, to pay towards strangers' medical bills. Just as it's no surprise that some people who can afford to send their children to school want a society in which they're not obliged, through tax, to pay for other people's children to go to school.
If this was so, you'd think that all the elitist families in the world would be anarchists, but no, libertarianism remains an aspect of countercultural politics, which was relatively fringe up until the last couple of years, and the only reason why libertarianism is becoming so prominent is because average everyday people are gaining more access to more information, which previously was never discussed and or deliberately buried by academia and the mainstream media. Meanwhile, all the corporatists and political elites advocate for more government management of the market. Why is this? Well, this is because you've constructed a straw man of libertarian ethics and argumentation. Again, libertarianism appeals to everyone at no one's expense. Welfare statism and government expansion only benefit the state, bankers, and corporations. It benefits the corporatists because it kills their competitors and creates artificial scarcity in the market, which results in prices increasing and more people buying their products. It benefits the bankers because it artificially limits the means by which people are able to trade and or manage their finances. And consequently, it benefits the state by making the market easier to manage and to collect taxes for itself. Regulations and government programs only benefit the political elite at the direct expense of the non-politically connected. Libertarians are not the selfish ones here. You, and people like you, are the selfish ones. And don't think I haven't noticed that this is an attempted critique of libertarian philosophy and ethics, and all you've done so far is fling ad hominems and appeal to idpol. Sorry, buddy, it's not even remotely virtuous or altruistic to advocate for the government to steal from people and initiate force against them and force them to associate with it. You and your statist contemporaries are in absolutely no position to take the moral high ground!
And so on and so forth. But the only reason they seek such a society, Rawls argued, is because of their lucky circumstances. They've been dealt good biological and socio-economic cards, and as such, they stand to lose a card or two should society attempt to equalize the hands of those less fortunate.
This is a false dichotomy, and, also for reasons noted earlier, welfare statism is what results in poverty. Who would have thought that people having more ability to manage their own lives results in a better quality of living than having a ruling class which has no incentive to serve anyone other than themselves managing everything?
Thus, this is the primary reason I'm not a libertarian. Despite the fact that I came from a broken family and had a very rough upbringing, I am extremely lucky to have the characteristics that I do. And while I've worked extremely hard to get where I am, I did not earn the temperament, patience, charisma, and, if you will, intellect that I have.
Imagine having such a shitty premise to your argument that you need to shift the goalpost halfway through making it. Libertarians just are rich people who want everything their own way and don't care about the poor. Rich stay rich and poor stay poor, which is why welfare statism is compassionate. Cites a libertarian who's a black guy that grew up during the Great Depression in the United States, and yourself be someone who came from a broken family that became wealthy later in life. Derp!
I was simply dealt good biological cards. Thus, I'm convinced that some of the fruit of my labour should go to those less fortunate, and that the same is true of Walter's fruit.
Holy shit, he's actually making eugenicist arguments in an attempt to justify welfare statism. Well, so much for modern progressivism not being based on the arbitrary and roundly debunked pseudoscience of eugenics. Well, anyway, if you think that you should give to charity, then you go ahead and do so. You do not have the right, however, to force Walter to do so with his property, because the constant fact remains, he is still a human being with human rights. I mean, I don't really know how to respond to this. I don't feel like my reaction there is sufficient. Progressives in 2019 are now actively trying to argue for welfare statism based on eugenics.
The second reason I'm not a libertarian is because I don't believe in natural rights, but I reject this because I don't believe any action is non-contingent.
Our choices are influenced by outside forces because we consider those forces. There is no part of the neurology involved in choice making that is outside of the human brain, therefore determinism is bunk.
And so to those of you who are libertarian and non-religious, I'd like to ask a question. What makes you think we're born with natural rights?
Well, I spent a better chunk of the first half of this video explaining it.
What part of the state of nature possibly yields the right to liberty? Sure, we're born free, but that doesn't mean we have the right to be free.
Yes it does. Since humans are naturally free, this means that the initiation of force necessarily requires a justification since it's an active position, and freedom and human rights are a passive position. And as I've gone over earlier, there is absolutely no way to justify an initiation of force.
Does it? As it stands, I maintain that Thomas Hobbes got it right when he said that in the absence of a social contract, life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
This is a common misunderstanding empiricists have of the rationalist methodology. All natural rights suggest is that you can demonstrate that you have rights through observation and a priori reasoning. You of course have to secure your rights for yourself and create associations that would help ensure your rights are maintained. Natural law does not claim that no one will attempt to violate the rights of another person, or that each person starts off with associations established to help them secure their own rights. Only that these rights can be naturally demonstrated. And this is better since anyone can associate with any person or group they like under the terms they agree to in order to secure their desires, which results in a competitive market with an incentive to economize, meaning that private producers have an incentive to serve their customers, not to mistreat them, keep their prices affordable, and their quality of service as high as possible. Because the state can simply take whatever it needs in order to sustain itself, or simply because they want more, state-provided services have none of these characteristics. On top of this, since the state requires forced association and theft to merely exist, and because the key function of the state is as a monopoly on arbitration, which allows politicians and government employees to decide based on their own arbitrary whims who is and isn't going to be punished, regardless of whether or not they actually committed any crimes, political rule is itself in its premise implying a lack of order and complete despotism. So actually, it's statism, which results in barbarism and death, and anarchy, which creates order and prosperity.
The third reason I'm not a libertarian is because I don't believe in libertarian free will.
And we've already demonstrated that this was false. I just wanted to include what his third point was so that people didn't assume I don't have a rebuttal to his third point because I didn't address it. No, I do have a rebuttal and I already provided it, so we're not going over this point. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. If you liked it, please comment, rate, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.